Hello, and you are listening to EcoJustice Radio, a project of SoCal 350 Climate Action. Our show presents environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Welcome, I am Jack Ite. On today's show, Going Local, Drought Resilience, Storing Rain, and Soil Regeneration, host Carrie Kim will be interviewing Keisha and Casey Ernst, co-founders of BioAmendments, a biologically focused compost company dedicated to producing diverse soil microorganisms to be used in soil regeneration. Keisha and Casey Ernst are microbe farmers and soil health consultants with a strong background in permaculture, a love of food forests, and an obsession with microscope adventures. They are founding members of the Sierra Soil Biology Association, a non-profit organization of biology-focused soil food web consultants, compost producers, lab techs, and community influencers who promote the regeneration of soil. Check out our website to listen to their interview from 2021, The Art and Science of Microbe Farming, episode 144.
Aloha, this is Carrie Kim. Listeners, thank you for joining us today as we delve into current narratives and realities around drought resilience, storing rain, and regenerating the soil at home. We have our guests today, Keisha and Casey Ernst, founders of catalyzed BioAmendments, to share on these topics. First, we'd like to thank the Tongva ancestors for their enduring presence, legacy, and stewardship of this area. Our show comes to you from the ancestral homelands of the Tongva and all of their relatives. We invite you to align with and support local First Nations and their homelands wherever you live. On Turtle Island, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association recently reported that half the mainland is currently experiencing drought. However, drought is not a fixed conclusion. It is a sign of imbalance in both soil and the water cycle, most of which has been human created over both the long and short term. Irrigation in agriculture is often blamed as a primary culprit of water misuse and abuse. However, the responsibilities around water and soil begins at home. Taken together, the collective action of many human beings can regenerate soil and restore natural water flows of rain and the water cycle as a whole. This show is dedicated to what each of us can do locally to become better stewards of water and soil, to change the stories of scarcity and lack that are not inherent in nature. Keisha and Casey Ernst of catalyzed BioAmendments are here joining us to share practical and effective approaches to honoring water and soil that work with the natural cycles. Through small individual changes will emerge the big change that leads to abundance and balance and restored ecosystems at home. Welcome back, Keisha and Casey.
Yeah.
Hello.
You know, to begin at the, we covered this in our last show with you, but it's sort of a different reality now. We weren't under water restrictions at that time. Things continue to accelerate. And I would like to know what your comments are around the current scarcity and conservation narratives around water.
It's certainly, what are we down to now? 2 days a week at 15 minutes per watering in some places. So
in some places, one time a week, right?
There's one time a week. Thank you for correcting me. That's really a lack of water. I mean, I think a lot of people are really used to being able to water their garden, their lawns, their veggies every day, or, at least every other day, 3 times a week. And so, with these restrictions, you're seeing it everywhere. You're seeing, landscape going dry. You're seeing people starting to pull out their lawns and replace it with more, rock landscape. And astroturf is something that I've been seeing more and more lately. But it makes sense. What do you do in a situation where your plants are demanding to be watered 3 or 4 times a week and you're only able to water once? Mm-hmm. So it seems like at this point, soil health is something to really start considering if we want to keep our green spaces green.
I wanted to ask you very first, and it's just for openers, because pretty much, we have a large majority of listeners who I'm sure are doing some form of watering if they have land where they live. And some people really don't even understand that there's a certain time that's more optimal for watering, period. So people are used to watering whenever they want and however much they want. And it's really ineffective watering. So, for very, very basic, if you could give some very basic tips on just watering itself. I mean, we're going to go much deeper than this, but just that in itself, because people really, we see that all the time. We'll see people in the middle of the day just watering. Now we have these restrictions, but unless people are being fined or, that hasn't happened to an extreme degree. I know that some people have been fined for watering on the wrong day, but could you speak about effective watering?
Yeah, like you said, like putting on like a spray type waterings, like a sprinklers or anything like that in the middle of the day, you're going to lose so much of that water that you're putting out to evaporation. So it's honestly, the best times that you can water throughout the day is going to be in the late afternoon. Certain veggies and things like that don't like, being moist on their leaves at night. But if you get it in as the sun is going down, but maybe not all the way set, that's usually your best time. You're going to retain a lot more moisture in the soil and not have so much evaporation due to solar radiation and just outside temperature.
Mm-hmm. And are you guys in favor of drip irrigation? What are your feelings around drip?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be helpful, especially when you're talking about the wind. I know that's something since we've relocated to the LA areas that we weren't so used to, but it is, the late afternoon, it picks up. And so sometimes, regardless of how hot it is outside, if you've got sprayers above ground on, the wind just picks it up and takes it right away. So you have to not only be thoughtful of the sun, but of the wind, especially if you're not using drip.
But I think drip, honestly, I mean, it obviously doesn't work well for grass, right? Drip does have its limitations. And when you're watering broader areas, yes, the investment costs and things like that are a little bit higher with drip, but you can get drip under canopy layer. You can get it under mulch where the water is never actually exposed really to the outside air all the way, right? So it's actually already protected in that mulch layer. It has something to seep into like immediately, and it's much, much more effective.
Hold the moisture much better. So why is it not recommended for grass? Is it because the
biggest issue with grass would be trying to get enough water to everywhere. When drip comes out, it comes usually just in a pillar right underneath where that drip nodule is. Mm-hmm. You can get a little bit of a spread around the emitter. But with grasses, you want every single piece of it to be green because you want it to be a blank, big blank green canvas. And so you have to have that broadcast. Otherwise, you're not going to get that.
Well, saying that, but okay, so let's assume that people say they are keeping their grass. Would it be better for them to try to actually grow their grass, let their grass grow taller instead of continuing to mow it and mow it and mow it?
Absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. We've noticed that a lot with the landscaping that we've seen in the LA areas. Everybody, for some reason, they mow it once a week. Some places even mow twice a week. And you're taking away a lot of organic matter. You're killing off, you're taking off the tops of that grass, which that grass is then going to have to try to restore. So it's going to be using a lot more water to push that energy upward. And so, if you gave it a break, let it produce a little bit of height on there. It's going to start creating its own shade and its own canopy for itself by having, just a little bit more of that grass up off the ground.
And they're losing the moisture by cutting, right? I mean, they're losing all that moisture that's in those taller blades of grass. So I'm really all about seeing a lot more grassy meadows around. So I hope that more people just let the grass grow. Stop cutting. I'm starting with one of the most simplest solutions. I mean, not solutions, but one of the simplest things people can do, right? Because the more they cut, also the more exposed in between those blades of grass is, and the hotter it is.
Definitely.
That's true.
So let's go back to, if drought is defined by a lack of precipitation or rain, we need to examine why we have less rain here. And, we know that human behavior is truly at the root cause of drought historically. So I'm wondering what you guys have to say about the less rain. I mean, it's apparent. We know that it's related. The water and soil are interconnected, but a lot of people don't understand that connection. So if you guys could speak about this cycle of rain and also what's happening with the soil as far as the condition of soil today.
I mean, a lot of the area in Southern California used to be forested. At this point, we know that that's not the most common sight anymore, although there are still canyons that are beautiful and have plenty of trees growing. You know, overall, there's pretty serious desertification issue on our hands. You know, there's a lot that contributes to rain. It's not just plants, but plants do have a huge part to play in our water cycles. So when we lose our trees, we lose our plants that have the deepest roots and the easiest ability to tap into that groundwater that is below the surface, you know, that we can see with our eyes. And those trees really, they act like pumps. Those roots go deep into the soil. They are pulling water up into the body of the tree. It's respirating out through the leaves into the sky and eventually coming back down to the ground. I mean, there's also the evaporation from the ocean and the rivers and, you know, the bare ground to consider. So, you know, how fast is that water evaporating from the surface of the earth whenever it's present? Mm-hmm. So if there are no plants there to regulate this flow, it happens fairly quickly. We see, you know, right after the rains quit, you know, the winds pick up, it starts to get hotter, and very quickly the ground starts to crack and dry out. And if one observes where there are actually plants growing, those giant cracks in the soil from the dryness, they're not really happening. You know, the roots of the plants are providing structure and providing protection and holding more water into the soil. So, you know, it's the fires, the deforestation,
agriculture,
all of it really has been contributing to this cycle for a long time.
There's just so much bare ground now. You know, you drive anywhere from, you know, we drive back and forth from Nevada City to LA. And I mean, most of the land you drive by in that 7-hour trip is completely barren. There is nothing covering the surface of that ground. It's completely exposed to the sun, the solar radiation, the wind, all that. And when you have that exposed surface like that, moisture that is baking out of there, it travels up faster than it can start to accumulate. And it ends up, with the heat rising, it ends up way up in the stratosphere in an area where even if it does accumulate, it's not going to fall here. It's going to end up catching a jet stream, blowing halfway across the country, and then flooding somewhere else because now they're getting too much of that water.
You're talking about like atmospheric rivers, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, you know, it's you're not going to get those clouds aren't going to accumulate here and re-precipitate back down. Like you see in like the Congo or other rainforests, a lot of the water that's actually falling has fallen, come up through the trees, back into the atmosphere, and been recondensed, and then falls right back down. And then it's kind of like its own self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I know there was recently an article in the LA Times warning of coming atmospheric rivers here, and that we would have these, you know, like biblical rainfalls there for 2023. I know what you're talking about, Casey, as far as when you travel up the 5, and I don't know what you guys feel, because so much of that land is farmland, what you feel needs to happen there, because I mean, it's bare, as we know. I mean, do you feel that that's something that needs to be a policy change? I mean, how to change the fact that that is bare ground?
Policy changes, it's so tough for farmers always. You know, as soon as you say policy change, I almost imagine it's an instantaneous pushback. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think more of the word spread around the fact that bringing soil back to life isn't something that isn't beneficial. You know, if you have a higher quality produce, you're growing more than you did before. You're putting on less input material, less chemicals, less everything. Your soils are holding more water, so it's less irrigation. I mean, as soon as these different examples of how this is working can be spread around, and people can understand that it's not just good for the environment, it's good for the pocketbook as well. a lot of the times people look at these, environmental movements as, oh, this is going to be expensive, this is going to be difficult, but we have solutions that work large scale with farming that are building the organic matter in the soil, bringing diversity of microorganisms back, and slowly transferring over to something that is a lot less chemical dependent.
I think back to your question too, is like, what do? It's a lot of it is maybe not policy change, but mentality shift. Mm-hmm. These farmers are seeing now the impacts of this weather, and also the rising costs of fertilizers. So they need to start focusing more on their soil and focusing another way. But also, I was just thinking about this is if you look at all the watersheds in that the I-5 Valley. Mm-hmm. All the drainage is designed to get the water into a canal and get rid of it and get it out, get it away. That's how all modern construction is designed right now, is you want the water out and
far away as possible,
somewhere else. Exactly. And so, that whole valley used to be a marshland. All of Central California used to be a marshland. What did we do? We drained all the water out so that we could flatten it and put crops. So simple designs along those canyons and all the drainage routes, like slowing the water down, stop the water where it is, let it sink into the ground, and it's going to increase overall moisture in the area just by collecting the water that actually does end up falling there.
Yeah. What happens when you get rid of the floodplains? That's basically what we've done here. I know, like you said, floodplains for farmland. We've spoken about this before in other shows, like with Linda Gibbs, but we haven't specifically spoken about that drought is a sign of moving the wrong way through ecological succession. You guys speak about that?
Yeah.
Actually, hold that thought, because we actually need to take a break right now, but we'll come back and talk about what drought indicates about ecological succession in just a moment.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. We air every Monday at 9 a.m. on KPFT Houston and Wednesday at 3 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles. Stay connected by subscribing to EcoJustice Radio on all major podcast apps, and visit our website ecojusticeradio.org to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today you are listening to Going Local, Drought Resilience, Storing Rain, and Soil Regeneration with host Carrie Kim and guests Keisha and Casey Ernst, co-founders of Catalyst BioAmendments.
The two of you, we were talking about ecological succession and how drought is a sign of moving the wrong way in ecological succession, like moving to desertification or rock. And could you guys speak about that ecological succession and how people should perceive it when they see drought? How should they read those signs?
Yeah, so with ecological succession, we're looking at bare ground. So when we have no plants, the soil isn't covered. That's literally step one. So if there was an avalanche or a fire or a flood, basically that barren landscape that you're left with after that's over is going to be the first step. And so it is by following nature's process that we begin to reverse these conditions. And by adding in our own input, we can actually move things along faster. So yeah, if you have bare ground in a natural condition or in a more man-made condition, the first thing to do is to just start covering it with something. So, weeds are going to be the first thing that grow. They produce a ton of biomass that's instantly going to cover the ground. You see the earlier successional weeds, you're going to see plants come in with deeper roots like mallow, thistle, dock, all those weeds that we're familiar with. After that, we're going to drop leaves and build organic material on the soil as well. Then you're moving forward into deciduous trees, which are also building organic material around them at a really fast rate every time they drop their leaves every year. And then moving on to the highest succession, which is the old growth conifer forests. And so, what we are doing is simply adding organic material to the soil. So, the best way to do that is by planting something.
Mm-hmm.
And, I like to go out and really survey the ground, look at our backyards, look at the land around our houses, and start to look at where these little valleys, crevices, cracks are forming from the water running over the bare ground and carrying away all of the organic material and just all the plain soil. Even the rocks get washed away. And just interrupting those flows by covering the ground. You could use wood chips. You could use plants that are already present. Mm-hmm. We can chop and drop our weeds to the ground, or we can plant things that we like. And so, just beginning to build organic material by getting roots in the soil, or letting the roots of the plants that we, that will grow there, aka weeds, just have their space and their time, and just cutting them back instead of letting them go to seed, just continuing to lay their organic material on the surface of the ground. That's the cheapest and easiest thing that we can do. And then as we move up, paying more attention, more focus on actually moving the soil and reorganizing the earth to alter the flow patterns of water could be another step. But just simply paying attention to where our water flows and trying to slow it down with whatever we can.
Mm-hmm. And also being mindful of where you're planting the plants with respect to those water flows, right? Because sometimes people will not really be paying attention to, this is the way the water flows across my land. With gravity, work with gravity with your irrigation. So you have natural irrigation with gravity, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it. Oftentimes we'll see, gardens put in a way that's more aesthetic, or possibly just to shed water, when, with a slight orientation of the garden, just a little bit of an alteration, then you would have all the water coming down the hill from above it would be catching there, slowing and sinking. And, oftentimes we're working in these vast landscapes where we don't have irrigation, and we don't really have a way to work during the dry season. So we're working with the water when it comes. Mm-hmm. And, slight alterations of terrain can hold water in the ground the entire season, even when it's been very, very dry for many months. The plants don't show that above ground. They're not getting water, yet they're still producing a lush green leaf. Mm-hmm. And it's just a result of a slight alteration of the ground to hold water instead of shed it.
Could you guys speak about when people do cover with wood chips? Because here, and not in all places, but many places on the mainland are going through extreme drought conditions where the wood chips could actually emit carbon into the atmosphere if they're not getting properly watered. So could you speak about wood chips and how people should actually really think about wood chips, or whether, like Keisha, you've mentioned drip irrigation, so that people are really given the proper consideration of what they should cover the ground with, given their climate situation?
Definitely. You're right. Like the wood chips, if they dry out completely, can then become a fire hazard as well, right? A lot of the times, like the biggest mistake I think with wood chips and really any kind of like layout mulch, like be it hay or wood chips, is not putting it thick enough. Putting just to where one wood chip covers the ground underneath isn't really going to trap much moisture. You really want to put down thick layers, like 2 inches, 3 inches. If it's a lot of wood chips, but they're around. Trust me, they're tripping up trees everywhere, all over the place right now for the power lines. But the thicker that mulch layer, the more water holding or trapping capacity those wood chips are going to have. But yeah, it is kind of difficult, like wood chips, even that thickness, like right here where we are in California right now, it gets 105 every single day, and things they tend to dry out. So really the best thing you could do to cover ground is a living plant. Even, just find the native species that are still green this time of year, and find those ground covering species that grow all over the place. Wherever you are, there's always something growing, and it's always green in the summertime. So really green plants are going to be the best because they're not going to catch on fire as easy, and they're going to hold more moisture and continually add organic matter, where wood chips is a one and done.
Right. Having the living roots and that dynamism in the soil, which we know we need all the microbes that are feeding off of those roots, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like here also, we've used a lot of organic alfalfa as well as cover, but I know what you guys are saying. It's better to have living roots than anything else. And I know when we spoke with Elaine Ingham, one of your mentors, said she was really all about the native ground covers. So I wanted to address trees because here and many places, aside from just the wildfires, it seems more and more, and even especially when it's a drought situation, that people will even chop down or take out their trees because of the water issues. And this is the time when we actually need more trees than ever. And we're losing so many trees as well to wildfires or to habitat or to people doing development. We've lost so many trees compared to what, as you said, it used to be so forested from, north to south. So what do you want to say about tree canopy and planting trees, even though these are the conditions that we have? At the same time, we need to consider looking down the road in the future generations from now, because trees don't grow overnight and we need those deep roots. So what do you guys have to say about trees and planting trees?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about using mulch or ground cover, it is that covering the soil, that canopy layer that normally a forest would provide, or a meadow, or whatever the natural environment would be. And I would say planting your trees at the right time of year, especially if you're planting trees that are going to be off drip irrigation, or you're doing large scale regenerative work where you're trying to get plants in the system, you don't have irrigation, and just trying to do your best there. You're going to want to really look at the season. Planting trees, shrubs, really any perennials in the fall after it starts raining is the best time of year for them to take hold. And the other thing is placement. A sycamore tree is going to want to grow in a different place than an oak tree is going to want to grow. And so, doing your research and, again, going back to, perhaps altering the earth in a way where when you're looking at the watershed, you can think this tree is going to want a lot of water. So instead of just planting it directly on a hill, form a well around the tree, or even on flat ground, just altering the earth so that you could imagine when water flows by, it's going to stick around near that tree and really infiltrate.
Mm-hmm. Like the little berms and...
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also about trees, speaking about trees further, we know that they, as you've said, they store water. We've lost a lot of sequoias here, and they store a tremendous amount of water in general. But one of the people that we had interviewed on the show, he had said that every single person, he's working with old growth forest and reforestation of old growth forest. And he had said that every single person should actually plant 3 trees in their lifetime that will outlive them.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And then all that it really takes, though, is you have to water the trees in their infancy,
Yeah, once they get established, most of these trees, especially if they're native, right? And focusing on native to where you are, planting those kind of trees that already grow there, because we're going through extreme situations kind of everywhere, but those fluctuations always did kind of happen already in those areas. They're just becoming more extreme. So sticking to native trees in your area is going to give you a way greater chance. Like, it's just increasing your probability that those trees are going to hang on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And could you guys talk also about the roots of trees? Because we know that trees, when the soil is not in a beneficial way, that the roots are more likely to go sideways rather than vertically down. So if you could speak about the roots of trees and what people can do to support, say they already have existing trees, but they may be growing sideways. The roots may not really be drawing deep.
So working on compaction layers is far easier to do before the tree goes in the ground. Once we get to a point where we have large trees with roots that are growing horizontal across the ground, we have to do manual. We have to get in there with, either a deep root zone injector or sometimes that's not even good enough. We might have to use big drills or chisels to manually access the root zone and get the right organic material, microorganisms down there to really help the tree push through that. And it isn't always possible, although we can support those old trees. We have ways of doing it. That's a lot of damage that's been done over time. So it's another thought when you're planting trees is maybe start working on the soil. If you're at square one and it's bare ground and you know that succession for trees is way later down the road, it might be a good idea to start out with some tending the garden with weeds so they can really get in there and start to put those taproots down and break that soil up, get the right microorganisms in place, and really put focus on where those trees are going to go. I'm certain that's going to buy a lot of time for the tree. It's going to really help it get its roots straight down from the beginning so that we're not going back 50, 60 years later and trying to correct damage.
Mm-hmm. Could you clarify again with weeds? Because I think most people know what is Bermuda grass. And, probably the cheapest option when you're talking about keeping living roots is you keep that Bermuda grass and you just cut it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Whenever, if you can have a whole ground covered, imagine if it was wood chips, right? Just it's a plant. You're going to move those wood chips out of the way and plant there, but you're going to leave them everywhere else. So if you're, just same thing with weeds or Bermuda grass, you could just drag down the middle of it or dig it out of the way and then plant yourself a tree right down in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've learned to make friends with Bermuda grass because when I had nothing else growing it, but it would grow. I just let it grow until I was planting something else, and it was beneficial because it was super hot. Nothing was growing at that time, so it was better to keep them. I knew it was better to keep the living roots. Even yeah, people need to make friends with weeds, quote unquote weeds.
Yeah, and I mean, a good thing if you aren't friends with your weeds, just compost them. Leave their roots in the ground and make their tops into fertility. I think it's a good
practice for people to just remember. Just that is a very simple thing. Living roots in the ground. You can cut the tops off. Although, let's keep growing our grass. Or I'm thinking, they can even integrate other kinds of grass. So the grass has more diversity. If you have just like a lawn, that you could add in native grass seeds into that so that it's not just one kind of species of lawn.
Mm-hmm. Diversify the plantings.
Mm-hmm. So in Texas, people are being encouraged to convert lawns to patios, like concrete. In Nevada, people are being given cash for planting desert landscapes. And here, as you've mentioned, we continue to see more and more people and businesses installing toxic synthetic turf. So what do you say to people who have these choices? What would you say to someone who is getting ready to do one of those things?
I would say to remember when you put your patio in that's a watershed now. When you start to create these areas of, your roof, your concrete patio, your driveway, those are great places to collect water off of. And I can understand, lessening the landscape. I can get where people are coming from, but I would still consider, when it's raining, how the water is coming down, where it's moving, and how you could use that for the landscape that you still have left.
It is good. I think just like these grasses, like a lot of these lawns that they're asking people to tear out, they don't grow there naturally, right? It kind of brings us back to the native thing. They're big water takers. They're to really heavy impact on an environment that they're not supposed to be in. Mm-hmm. So it is a good idea to kind of revert into different style landscapes. Like if you're living in the desert and you have lots of sagebrush around, maybe planting more cactusy plants and having more rockscape. Rocks do, if you're laying them thick enough, they can act as a type of mulch as well. When rain falls, they will slow water down and give it time to actually sink into the ground. They do heat up, which is a little bit different than the wood chips do, but yeah, I mean, honestly, focusing on rainwater collection as well in these super dry areas. That rain does fall eventually. And a standard home, like standard 25 square foot home, every inch of rain that falls on that roof is 1,500 gallons of water. So throughout a year, you can have upwards, depending on where you live. Out here, I think we got 12 inches of rain last year. And that's almost 100,000 gallons of water that you could have collected off of your roof. So, there's things. I'm sorry, that math is wrong.
Oh, we know it's a lot. That's okay.
Yes, it's a lot of water.
So, what would you recommend to people around the rain harvesting? Is there any specific recommendations you have around the process of doing that, or?
The simplest thing is like on roofs, they already have downspouts that take it from your roof and put it down to the ground so it can go to the drain and leave your house. Tap into your downspout. Have your downspout go into a tank. And then at the top of that tank, you can put an overflow where it just connects right back into your drain system. So, you're not filling a tank until it's full and then it's just gushing out the top. It can then go back into a pipe and right back into your drain system. So you still have that protection of not flooding your home, but you can actually capture a lot of that water before it ends up, down the street in the gutter anyway.
Well, it's amazing because there has been like a rainwater harvesting program here where we are, but you don't see people doing it. I think people just, it's sort of, people have not, if things have not become dire enough that people have really thought that way. Some people have that, but very few, I would say, on average.
Other ways too, when you're just looking at the downspout, is creating gardens, looking at where the water's going to come off the roof and then paying attention to your design and sinking all that water off the roof directly in the soil down and away from your house.
Or like you said, making the flows like the way a permaculturist would design so that the water would flow into a certain area.
There's so much information out there that you can look up, just to see how permaculture designs are doing that.
Exactly. I mean, there's definitely a lot of resource out there just to start inquiring into it and just thinking differently. I think, as you said, Casey, it's really about a mental shift. And once we really start making that new habit to think that way, I mean, this is something that we used to know, but now we have to remember how to live with nature and to be observant and to work with the elementals that we have. I wanted to ask you too, whether you think that conservation and regeneration are in some way at odds with each other, or do you see them as being dependent upon one another? Because I know oftentimes conservation, people start doing things and it's sort of like a pulling back. It's not expansive. It's like very contracting in a way. Oftentimes that happens, where people are like, we go into it like scarcity mode instead of seeing that actually if we plant more green, that will actually, in the end, in the longer term, will actually have saved more water.
No, I think you're right. I mean, the main kind of mentality towards conservation is just nature's over there and we're going to let it do its thing, right? And right now it's like we've messed up everything so much around us that isn't what nature was. That you can't just leave it alone like that anymore, because that's not where it was. It's not going to be able to keep going because it's already been set back so far by us. So I feel like regeneration in a kind of a sense is like, we're going to go in there and modify things that, even though it is in nature, we want to keep it as natural as possible, but little things that are going to help assist the things that we've already done to that space that have set it back so far.
Right.
There's also the thought that there's a difference between thoughtful plantings, putting plants in an ecosystem for a reason, for habitat regeneration, because the plant will grow there well without water. There needs to be some sort of thought about it. The idea that just go plant whatever you want, we need more plants, is going to fix it, isn't necessarily going to work either. So, I mean, conservation, but education around the way that we're going about these things.
So let's hold that thought, guys, and we'll come back and talk more about conservation and regeneration.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. We air every Monday at 9 a.m. on KPFT Houston and Wednesday at 3 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles. Stay connected by subscribing to EcoJustice Radio on all major podcast apps and visit our website ecojusticeradio.org to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you are listening to Going Local, Drought Resilience, Storing Rain, and Soil Regeneration with host Carrie Kim and guests Keisha and Casey Ernst, co-founders of Catalyst BioAmendments.
So Keisha and Casey, we're talking about conservation and regeneration. And one of the things with conservation, oftentimes it's like that, keep this space pure, don't introduce new species, don't change things. As you said, Casey, like leave things the way they were. And it's not realistic now with our situation.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard there's so many different opinions on this, but as climate's changed, some of our native plants can't exist here anymore. I mean, we were talking earlier about how we were seeing there used to be oak forests everywhere. You can't just go back to the desert and just stick an acorn in the ground and hope that it's going to pop back up into a forest again. So we do have to be thoughtful about the way that we sequence our plantings in order to actually build soil to a place where it can sustain these large-scale forests, these old growth forests through time.
You always have to start with the soil. Well, I wanted to ask you, when we were talking about ecological succession, like going from the stage of bare rock or bare ground all the way leading up until you have a forest, that things have grown and grown and grown. What kind of timeline, I mean, could that be really in nature? Like if no one was there, if there's no human intervention at all, I mean, how long are we talking about that might be? I mean, I know it's all contextual based on the climate and where you are geographically, but what kind of timelines are we looking at or speaking about?
huge timelines here. I mean, think about how the trees work, how they drop their leaves seasonally, and then think about so the lack of microorganisms that are present in the soils now, those are the lives that usually break down this organic material. So our comminutors are our shredders and rippers, our insects, our microbes, our worms, our nematodes. All these critters need to be in place for that system to function. So if you don't have the micro life present to break down the organic material as it falls, you can just imagine a stacking happening over time and a lack of breakdown. How long does it take for the animals to come back? I mean, in some cases, I think it happens quite quickly, but how often do we get the chance to see how quickly nature comes back without human intervention? It's
a little bit during the pandemic. Not quite.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking of. And there's a few places where, disasters happen, Chernobyl or lost cities or whatever, or even buildings that get abandoned, and you quickly see nature come in and just take it over. But how long does it take to get back to pristine life? I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question.
You had mentioned that you had a concern about microbes and the fact that, we're so many species are being lost. What about the state of microbes in the soil? We have such a deficiency of microbiology in the soil, but what are your concerns around microbes surviving?
It ties so much into the water. I mean, we have this one example in this farming community where literally the groundwater, the water that's coming out of the well, when you test it, it is full of nitrogen fertilizer that hasn't been. So these microbes, that their job in the soil, besides to create soil, work with plants to help them grow, they have so many multiple functions going on at once. But one of their jobs is to clean the water as it comes through the soil. And, as we've tilled, as we've applied these chemicals, all the asides are meant to kill microorganisms. Chlorine is meant to kill microorganisms. There's so many chemicals that we work with on a regular basis that are literally created to stop the growth of microbes. And then the actual way that we till and we farm breaks up the soil, takes away the structure, and takes away the life. And so what ends up happening is all of these chemicals, these nitrogen fertilizers, are flowing into the groundwater. And so it's no longer fit for human consumption. You cannot take a glass of water and drink it. And literally the farmers in the valley can't add more chemicals to the soil because there's so much in the water that it would just be extreme to add anything new. And so the place we're at right now is extreme. We have a lot of repairing of the soil to do to bring it back to a place that's going to, support a forest.
And kind of onto the topic of, loss of microorganisms, the only thing, back to the conservation thing as well, is when human beings, when you think about conservation for animal species or something other than plants, all we focus on is large animals, right? Things that we can see with our eyes. And we have no idea what we're losing every single day in the microbiological world. It could be by the millions every day instead of one or two species, so it's because we can't see it with our eyes. Nobody really focuses on it. So it's probably unfathomable how much microbiological life we have lost in, say, the last 100 years due to our farming practices.
Right. Well, it's an interesting thing because I know we are, in the 6th grade extinction and there's so many species being lost, but at the same time, I know there's also new species being discovered, right? I was listening to a video with Jeff Lawton, who's a renowned permaculturist, and he was speaking about every year there's 2,000 some number of trees that are discovered every year. And I thought that was really remarkable. I mean, just gave some bit of optimism around the whole thing. It's not all just death and mayhem. There's still life out there. Would you say that it is actually a fallacy to even say we have a water shortage, knowing that so much of the water is being diverted or channeled elsewhere? And it's not actually, because that mindset of the shortage or the scarcity makes you think that it's not physically there, but there is water in the system. It's about how we are able to store the water back in the system the way it was meant to be, flowing.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that there's a water shortage in the terms of the rainfall, right? Hasn't been the same rainfall that we are expected to get in these areas. But I don't know. Yeah, I think it's interesting how we allocate it. Like a lot of the farming practices that are used are super wasteful with water, and it's just, yeah, I think there's a lot more intelligent ways that you could use the same water that we have right now and actually make it more effective in farmland, in agriculture.
What would you feel needs to change in agriculture per se? I mean, is there a few key things that you say would need to be changed?
Covering the ground. It's what we're going to say every time. It's drive through any orchard I mean, here, I speak to here because I spend so much time here in California, but you drive through the orchards there and the ground it looks like sand. And that's it. It looks like there's trees in the desert with sand. And so a lot of what you're going to get is massive amounts of evaporation because that water the ground is completely exposed. Even though there is a tree canopy over the top, again, you're going to have wind that runs through there. The temperatures are going to be hotter without all that ground coverage. I mean, a lot of it, I think, could be solved by just covering the ground underneath the trees.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of comforting to see when you go up the 5 that at some point you will start seeing that there are farmers who are covering the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Closer up, farther up north, but there was that whole section in the middle that they're not. But I think, yeah, we have to just keep hoping that more and more people start noticing, and it is that critical mass, 100th monkey effect. The more we see it, the more it happens. The more one person is doing it, the more other people are curious. And I know that it definitely is happening because there's so many people around the world globally that actually are working on this and working in this way. And it will only continue to grow out of necessity, out of sheer necessity. Keisha, we were talking earlier about what happens with wind erosion. In case you brought up about sort of these dust storms, it's basically like the Oki Dust Bowl in many places due to desertification throughout the whole heartland. We have this situation as well. But could you talk about some of the toxicity that gets airborne because of the situation of dryness and desertification?
Yeah, it's something we've been getting a lot of questions about lately, where folks will be doing soil tests and they have just high levels of lead in particular in congested city areas or places where there's a lot of vehicle traffic. So heavy metals, pesticides, basically anything that we spray on our crops can go airborne and can also, with the dust, cling to the dust. And so a lot of the times it is more the dust that's blowing through the air with what's attached to it that goes into our lungs, onto our bodies, or onto our food sources that are really bad for us. And it's not so much that the plants are sucking up these toxic, these heavy metals into their bodies, unless it's a root vegetable, of course, but that it's literally blowing in the air and landing on our fruits and vegetables. And so where I would really love to eat my veggies without having to wash them because they're coming from a really wholesome environment, there's a huge reason why we do wash our fruits, vegetables, and produce is because the dust that's on it can be not so great for our bodies. Mm-hmm. So in these areas where we know that the soil is really polluted, again, covering the soil with plants is a great way to protect ourselves from that dust getting airborne and blowing around. It's a good way to protect our neighbors. And then when that isn't always the case, just washing our fruits, our vegetables, our foods really well and considering what is possibly out there as far as contaminants go.
Well, and as far as covering the ground, but then also wouldn't it be an additional benefit to then use a product like yours, the catalyzed BioAmendment extract as a compost extract to start injecting microbiology back into that soil to help remediate the toxicity that is in the soil being held down now?
Yeah, definitely. Microbiology, the microbes in the soil have that a capability of absorbing some of these heavy metals, and they don't go away, but they've taken out of solution, right? So if they're inside the bodies of some of these microorganisms, they can't make their way into our food or out into the air unless everything gets killed off and set back to zero and everything starts to decay again. Then those things are then reintroduced to the environment. But yeah, that's your first line of protection against these heavy metals. And a lot of these chemicals is microorganisms. They're the ones that are going to be able to break apart glyphosate into its kind of inert form and hold on to a lot of these heavy metals that we find in the soil.
Mm-hmm. So knowing what you both know about bacteria, fungi, microbiology, what would be your moonshot recommendations around drought for farmers, especially in drought critical states like California, Oregon, Texas, Arizona, Nevada. I know we've talked about covering the ground. Of course, that's number one. We started with that as like a healthy soil principle. But what other things might you suggest?
I would say composting, considering your waste materials. No matter the farming situation, there's always going to be organic materials that would traditionally either be burnt or hauled away. And, we can, with a little bit of know-how, use our waste materials to grow these microorganisms. And, we're talking about how, there could be so many species going extinct every day, but you're right. There's plenty of life left in the microbe world. And, there's species of bacteria that break apart glyphosate. There's fungi that does the same. These microorganisms are just a treasure trove of useful things, for us. Like, these microbes are working in a way that is really going to push these crops forward. And a great way to grow the microorganisms is by yourself in compost. You're going to see through time more and more products coming out, bottled microbes, shelf stable microorganisms that you can use as crop fertilizers. But the truth is there's not much better than making your own compost. Once you get an inoculum going and you start to learn how to work with those, invisible life that are surrounding us, it's really creating your own fertility right there on site. And so for farming, I believe that to be the best move forward is to really start thinking in that way, start looking at what it's going to take to, harness that power the same way you would work with cattle to, regenerate pastures and grazing. You do the same thing with microorganisms. You can't see them. So it's a little bit more of a challenge, but it can be done.
But and using that compost in your soil, even at home in agriculture as well, it increases the water holding capacity of the soil, and it can then help mitigate these drought situations that we're having. If the ground can hold more water, then we need less rain, technically. So.
Right. Makes perfect sense. How do you two envision changing the irrigation practices on conventional farms? Or would you say that the key really is just to have them have more of a regenerative approach? They have cover crops, they cover the soil. What other things do you feel that they should do as far as their irrigation practices themselves?
Often when we come into a farming situation, there's the experts. So it's our job to really look at what systems they have in place and to try to work with what they currently have. When you're looking at large scale agriculture, little changes, something that might seem simple, switching to drip or converting, one small thing over, it is going to be millions and millions of dollars. When you're working at scale like that, big changes are expensive. And so we always come in and try to look at how we can slightly alter the way that farmers are thinking. We come in, we use a lot of their expertise. They are often our guides on how we're going to, come together to change these practices. So a lot of the times it's coming in and just looking at what's going on right now and trying to educate and then also learn. And so we're teaming up with farmers really to help figure out what our best practice is today and what our best practices are going to be through time as we see results, making, marks where it's just like, okay, we've reached this goal. We're seeing things progress forward. Maybe now we're going to invest in a different system, whether it be new machinery or an entire different irrigation set. Sometimes we're just looking at timing, like Casey said earlier.
So I want to just go back to wrap as far as just to reiterate what people locally and wherever you are, I don't mean just locally to here on Tongva lands, but wherever people are living, because pretty much majority of the mainland is being affected in some way, whether by climate change or by drought, and what people should actually do to care for the soil where they are. Just a few things, if you could reiterate those few things.
I like covering the ground, making sure your ground has got some kind of coverage over it, be it wood chips or living plants, preferably living plants, and start composting. Start making compost and get it out into your gardens. I know it seems like such a small thing, but a little bit goes a long way if everybody's doing it.
And did you have something more you want to say, Keisha?
Keep building organic material in any way possible.
Not to waste those things and to send them off in the green bin. They should keep them on at their own homes, like you said, and cover their soil with that, cover the ground with their fallen leaves or, whatever organic matter they have around. can you guys share your links of how people can stay in contact with you? I know you have a new consultancy business that you're starting around soil regeneration and the microbial work that you guys do, and also about your products and your...
Yeah, you can always find us at www.catalystbioamendments.com. And then we've also got a new website. It's not up and running yet, but it's going to be soilmatters2.us whenever it's ready. And we will try to share it far and wide once it really gets started.
Fantastic. You guys are pivotal to helping more and more people turn regenerative, farmers and individuals alike. And we just thank you so much for that commitment.
Oh, thank you guys for having us.
Thank you, Ernst. We really appreciate it.
Thank you to our guests, Keisha and Casey Ernst. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been Going Local, Drought Resilience, Storing Rain, and Soil Regeneration. For extended versions of our interviews, become a member of our Patreon. Please connect with us on social media at EcoJustice Radio, SoCal350, and Adventures in Waste. If you like what you heard today and you want others to be informed, well, you know what to do. Subscribe to our podcast, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon and making a donation to the show. You have been listening to EcoJustice Radio, a project of SoCal 350. The show can be heard on kpfk.org, kpft.org, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Created by Mark and J.P. Morris, executive producer Jack Eit, producer and co-host Jessica Aldridge, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Buttes. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.